You wake up one morning, not with your eyes, but with a silent and fierce realization. You look around and at yourself, feeling a strange sense of disconnect. The life you're living doesn't truly feel like yours. Everything from the job you pursue, the way you behave, to the words you speak each day seems constructed as if meant for someone else. The choices you made, the roles you once played, and the sacrifices you called responsibilities turn out to be trades for approval, love, or peace. How long have you lived just to please? How long has it been since you last asked, "What do I truly want?" Amid all that noise, there has always been a quiet voice within. Faint, but never gone. It's been buried under the weight of shoulds, under the fear of letting others down, under the pressure to become someone good enough in the eyes of others. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And then the question comes, clear and certain. What would happen if, this time, you chose yourself? First, the moment that marks an inner turning point. Not everyone remembers the exact day when everything inside them began to shift. The real turning point of the inner life rarely arrives with dramatic upheaval. It's not like a storm crashing in. It often starts quietly, like a tiny crack. But if you're awake enough, you'll notice that from there, the entire structure within you begins to move. It might be on an ordinary morning, while you're making coffee, or stuck in traffic, your eyes drifting aimlessly out the window, not thinking of anything in particular, or on a late night when the world is still, and suddenly you feel like you're living a life that doesn't feel familiar. Not because anything is wrong, but because everything seems to be run by a version of you that isn't you. The job you show up to every day might be stable, maybe even good, but it leaves you without any sense of being alive. The polite, pleasant conversations still make you feel alone, even when surrounded by people. The yeses, the nods, the smiles you give to avoid truth have become so automatic they almost feel like your personality. But then one day, you realize you've been playing a role for too long. A role written by society, by your family, your teachers, your co-workers, your friends, and even your past self. What startles you isn't that the role is wrong, but that it has consumed the real person inside. Jung once said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." Only when you stop resisting that sense of disconnection, when you stop justifying your choices just to avoid the truth, can you finally look straight at it. And from that deep place within, a question rises, quiet but sharp as a blade. What would happen if, this time, I chose me? It's not rebellion. It's not selfishness. It's the awakening of a part of you that's been buried for too long. The child who once had simple but bold dreams, raw feelings untouched by edits, vague but honest desires. The part that once longed to write, to sing, to be silent, to explore, to slow down, to be free, but was packed away too early to fit into the box labeled adulthood. Carl Jung called this moment one again. Not into some ideal version of yourself, but into the truest one you've always been. You just forgot how to listen to them. Second, when you choose yourself, the world around you changes. One of the truths rarely spoken is this: living authentically doesn't just change you, it shakes the world around you. Not because you intend to cause disruption, but because every honest action breaks the order that once held things in place. An order maintained by silent endurance, reluctant nods, and prolonged compromise. When you choose yourself, when you begin to say no clearly, reject expectations that no longer fit, and stop participating in roles that have become suffocating, the web of relationships around you cannot remain unchanged. Because people don't just interact through actions, they interact through roles. And when you change your role, they are forced to change how they respond to you, whether they want to or not. Some will be confused. They may have loved you because you were always helpful. After all, you didn't argue because you knew how to keep the peace by stepping back at the right time. But when you start expressing your true opinions, setting boundaries, refusing what makes you uncomfortable, they'll see you as different. They may say you're cold, selfish, or that you're changing. And yes, you are changing, but not to become someone else. You're changing to return to yourself. In truth, you're not building a new version of yourself. What you're showing now is not some freshly minted personality, but the self that was always there, the one you kept in silence just to be loved, to be acceptable, to avoid rejection. And if a relationship cracks because of your authenticity, maybe it was never as solid as you believed. What breaks when you start being real was already fragile. You just hadn't dared to see it. Carl Jung once said that an authentic person doesn't just transform themselves, they unintentionally hold up a mirror to others. When you dare to live in alignment with your true self, you reflect to others the parts of themselves they've hidden. And not everyone is ready for that. Honesty makes people uncomfortable, sometimes even threatened. Because if you can live truthfully and still stand strong, then they're left asking themselves, so what's keeping me in the act? You'll witness a natural filtering. Relationships that once held together because of your compliance will slowly drift apart. Not because you're wrong, but because they can no longer control you in the old ways. And that can be painful. You may feel empty, feel a sense of loss, wonder, am I being too harsh? Am I pushing people away? But if you're patient enough to stay with yourself, you'll start to see a different kind of connection emerging, one that is deeper, more real. The people who stay aren't there because you make them happy, but because they truly see you. And the new people you attract, they're not drawn to the version of you trying to be agreeable. They're drawn to the clear, steady, honest energy you now radiate. Your presence begins to carry weight, not because you seek validation, but because you're grounded in who you are. You'll begin to clearly distinguish between the two types of connections. 1. Functional dependency, where you are needed because you meet expectations, because you always say yes, and you always clean up the emotional mess. 2. Real relationships, where you are heard, understood, and allowed to be yourself, even in your imperfection. And the strange thing is, once you stop needing others' approval to exist, you start attracting those who genuinely love the truth in you. Of course, getting there requires passing through the initial chaos, the strange looks, the vague criticisms, the temporary sense of isolation. But this isn't a cost. It's the necessary restructuring to rebuild your life on something real. Jung understood this well. Every honest act is a spiritual shift, not because you need to prove anything, but because you are restoring order within. And when the inner order changes, the outer world, even if unwilling, must shift with it. Eventually, you'll come to see something deeply important. If a relationship demands that you trade your selfhood just to keep it, then what needs to be preserved is not the relationship, but yourself. Third, the power of inner freedom. When you stop living to please others, the first thing you feel is not excitement or instant relief. It's emptiness, a strange kind of quiet. No more applause, no more approving glances, no more encouraging words that once fueled your performance. But then, within that emptiness, something begins to sprout, what Jung called inner freedom. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's the ability to live in alignment with your true self, unshaken by the fear of rejection, the obsession with image, or the need for approval. Jung believed that most of what we call self is a bundle of internalized social expectations. We grow up learning how to be lovable, likable, and agreeable. And in exchange for those things, we trade away our truth. But when you begin the process of individuation, you no longer accept that cost. You begin to contrary, you start living a deeper, more honest life. You stop trying to impress and start focusing on living in line with your inner values. You spend time on what matters, connect with real people, and peak your mind without softening the truth just to please. You're not more perfect, but you're more real. And in a world full of performances, that kind of quiet strength is rare. Inner freedom isn't loud or flashy. It's the relief of no longer chasing a script. It's the moment you sit alone and don't feel empty. It's the way you respond, not react, because you know yourself now. It's the power to stay silent when needed, to walk away when it's time, and to stay when your heart is fully in it. It's the state of living where you truly belong to yourself. You will lose a few things on the way back to yourself. The easy applause, the relationships built on compliance, the false safety of living by others' standards. But what you gain is immeasurable, the weight of wholeness. Jung believed a person doesn't need to be perfect, but they do need to be whole. And wholeness only comes when you dare to be honest about all that you are, even the parts you once hid. This kind of freedom can't be given to you. You can't buy it. You can't fake it. It comes from within, from the journey through your depths, from the courage to step out of familiar roles, and from accepting yourself without conditions. And once you touch that inner freedom, you won't want to go back, because finally, you have come home. Not to the past, but to your true self. No need to prove. No need to ask permission. 4. The past loses its power over you. And then, when you begin to live truthfully with yourself, no longer chasing approval, something strange happens. The past, which once had a firm grip on your life, begins to lose its power. When you live to please, the past is a constant shadow. The judgments you heard as a child, the disappointed looks, the rejections, the criticisms, the times you were ignored, they scatter through your inner world like shards of broken glass, making every step cautious and defensive. You don't decide based on what you truly want, but on what seems safe, acceptable, least likely to disappoint. That's not choosing. That's a life shaped by fear. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In the unconscious of many are wounds that were never truly seen. One moment of being mocked for expressing yourself becomes the reason you hold back for decades. A harsh remark from an adult when you were 8 becomes the seed of your self-doubt. One experience of abandonment grows into a lifelong fear of intimacy. Unless brought to light, these unseen wounds quietly drive your life in directions you never truly chose. And so, you live in a cycle of reactive behaviors, always trying harder to be recognized, always fearing to disappoint, always seeking approval to feel worthy. You overwork, overgive, and overextend yourself just to be accepted. The scariest part is you don't even realize it. You think you're doing the right thing. But when you start choosing yourself, everything changes. The first thing you realize is this: you no longer need to prove anything. You stop living as though you're on trial every day, where you're the defendant and everyone else is the judge. You no longer feel the urge to please just to feel valid. External validation, once the oxygen that kept your wounded self afloat, starts to lose its weight. You also stop filling the void inside with busyness, with relationships built on need instead of truth, with overcompensation that feels empty. You begin to understand, not all voids are meant to be filled. Some must be left open so you can finally see yourself. When you stop running, stop forcing, stop living as if you're constantly trying to fix something from the past, a deep truth surfaces. The past no longer holds power over you. It's still there, but it's no longer the voice that makes the decisions. It's no longer the engine behind every choice you make. You see it, you understand how it shaped you, and then you stop letting it steer. In analytical psychology, Jung didn't teach us to erase the past or the darkness. He emphasized dialogue with the unconscious, the act of returning to old wounds and rejected parts, but this time with the eyes of a conscious, compassionate adult. And when that happens, you're no longer the victim of your past. You are the one reborn through it. This is when you begin to live from the present, not a present rooted in avoidance, but one rooted in choice. You're no longer trying to repay some debt to the past, nor are you frantically trying to build a picture-perfect future to make up for old pain. You live for today, because today you see yourself as worthy of simply being, no conditions attached. And in that moment, you begin to feel light. Not because every burden has vanished, but because you've stopped carrying what was never truly yours. You no longer carry your parents' expectations, society's standards, or the fears of the child you once were. What's left may not be immediately clear, but there's a subtle guiding force that makes you feel, this feels right. When you stop chasing relationships that require you to shrink yourself, new people enter your life who meet you in deeper, more natural ways. No pretense, no performance. Everything begins to click in a way that feels oddly perfect. Jung believed that synchronicity isn't something you force through willpower. It arises when you are in harmony with your unconscious, when your mind and soul are no longer split. You stop living only by plans and start living by a deeper inner listening. And from that point of alignment, life begins to self-correct. But let's be clear. Synchronicity doesn't mean things suddenly become easy. Right timing does not equal no challenges. On the path of living truthfully, you will still face detours. Some doors you thought were open led to darkness. Some relationships that seemed strong turn out to be only stepping stones. The universe doesn't hand you an easier life, but it gives you a clearer signal system, a way to know when you're veering off course and when you're heading in the direction of your authentic self. You might meet someone you believe is your destiny, only to realize they came to teach you how to love yourself. You might lose your job and think you've failed, only to find it was the one thing that freed you from a trapped life. Synchronicity is not always comfortable, but it is always precise. It matches the frequency your soul is broadcasting. What matters most is learning how to listen, because synchronicity doesn't speak the language of logic. It speaks through intuition, through a quiet knowing without explanation. You begin to sense when something is driven by fear and when something arises from your inner truth. You stop evaluating things by right or wrong or win or lose, and instead start asking, is this aligned with who I'm becoming? Jung believed that when you live in a state of individuation, you enter into a sacred partnership between the self and the world, a state in which external events reflect internal growth. Life stops being a string of disconnected happenings and becomes a story unfolding, and you are not a side character. You are the lead. Meaningful coincidence doesn't shield you from pain, but it gives you faith that what's happening is not meaningless. You begin to view every experience as part of the journey, even loss, even failure, even the things that come and go. You understand that everything arrives right on time, not because you are flawless, but because you are real enough now to receive it. And when you live in that state, you no longer feel the need to force the flow of your life. You stop trying to control everything until it suffocates. You allow life to guide you, but you're not passive. You act from a place of deep stillness, where you trust that if something is not meant for you, it's because something more aligned is on its way. Synchronicity, in the end, is not about magic in the traditional sense. It is the alignment between essence and circumstance, between the inner and the outer, between soul and real life. And when that happens, you no longer need to strain to live. You simply live in truth, and life, in return, aligns itself with that truth. Sixth, you learn to be alone and love it. One of the clearest outcomes of choosing yourself is absence. Not the absence of people, but the absence of the noise you once used to distract yourself. The absence of busyness, of shallow conversations, of the constructed chaos you used to avoid having to listen to your inner voice. And then, after the days you bravely said no, after you began living truthfully, you enter a space unfamiliar to you, solitude. Loneliness at first is real. No one should deny that. It's the feeling of stepping into a quiet room and realizing that you once believed yourself to be independent, yet you had never truly been alone without feeling empty. That loneliness doesn't come from the absence of others, but from having never truly connected with yourself. You've been present everywhere, with everyone, but not with you. Carl Jung emphasized that the person who cannot tolerate solitude has never learned how to live with their inner world. And so, when you begin the journey of individuation, the journey inward, loneliness is inevitable. But it is not a punishment. On the contrary, it is the first gateway to true freedom. In that stillness, you begin to reconnect. You hear your inner voice more clearly. Forgotten desires begin to stir again. The love for drawing you abandoned at 12, the passion for reading shelved away as impractical, the habit of walking alone that once made you feel weird. The forgotten parts of you, the dreams left behind in the name of responsibility, all begin to return, gently, patiently. They're not angry you forgot them. They simply want to be remembered. And through this process, you also begin to let go of relationships you once maintained, just to avoid feeling empty. You stayed in draining connections simply to escape yourself. But when you no longer need someone to fill your inner void, you begin to see a clear distinction between relationships of that solitude, not because it's always easy, but because it's real. It doesn't deceive you. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't make you doubt yourself. It is simply the space where you can be exactly who you are, without judgment, without comparison, without pretending. Once you fall in love with solitude, every relationship that follows becomes lighter. You no longer come to someone to be filled, but to share. You no longer cling to a hand out of fear, because you know you will never lose yourself again. And when love arrives, if it does, it will come as a gift, not as a sedative. 7. The choice that changes everything. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And indeed, for much of our early lives, most of us live inside someone else's dream. We wear the collective visions of success, of ideal love, of a proper life. We chase standards. We strive to become someone, believing that one day, if we're good enough, successful enough, lovable enough, we'll finally feel whole. But if you've gone far enough down that path, you've probably realized this. Wholeness is not found at any destination. It doesn't exist in admiration, in a perfect relationship, or a checklist of achievements. Wholeness begins only when you dare to turn inward and ask, is this life, in the end, truly mine? Choosing yourself is not a fleeting decision. It's an inner turning point. It's not loud, not flashy. But if you truly choose, not just in words, but in every action, every decision, every release, everything inside you begins to shift. You begin to slow down. No longer racing through contests that don't belong to you. No longer saying what's palatable, doing what's expected, following a normal path. Instead, you start living with intention, choosing work for its meaning, not its image. Choosing people who let you be yourself, not those who make you perform, to be kept around. This is not a path of ease. Choosing yourself means stepping out of old safety. You will lose some familiar relationships. You'll no longer fit into surface-level conversations or feel at home in environments you once forced yourself to blend into. But strangely, you won't miss them, because deep down, you no longer belong in places where you have to trade pieces of yourself just to exist. Jung called individuation an irreversible process. Once you've awakened, you can't go back to sleep. Once you've seen your essence, you can't unsee it. And once you've truly chosen yourself, no matter how much the world resists, you can't return to the old performance. Because you've tasted the freedom of living in truth. You don't need all the answers to begin. No one is ever fully ready to step into awakening. What you need is the courage to take the first step, to break free from unconscious repetition and enter a space where you may not know what's coming, but you know this much. This time, you are living for you. This is an invitation, not a persuasion. No one can force you to choose for yourself. That choice has to rise from within. It has to come when you're tired enough of living through others' expectations. When you realize living for someone else's approval might earn you love, but it will never make you feel enough. And if you've read this far, maybe you are ready. Ready for a life where you no longer have to perform to be accepted. Where you don't have to be smart, pretty, optimistic, or kind all the time just to feel worthy. Ready for a life where you can simply be messy, complex, wounded, but real. Jung emphasized, inner growth doesn't come from avoiding the dark, but from embracing it, understanding it, and integrating it into the fullness of who you are. Choosing yourself is the same. It's not about choosing the most polished part of you. It's about choosing all of you, the light and the dark, the strength and the tenderness, the confidence and the pain. When you choose yourself, you choose to live a life with depth and roots. You stop searching for answers outside because you've started to hear your voice. You stop trying to be someone because you finally realize you already are. In the end, no one can walk this path for you. No one can choose for you. But if you can hear, if you can feel, if something in you stirs, then you can begin. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need everyone's approval. All you need is you and one simple but profound decision. This time, I choose me. There is no perfect moment to choose yourself. There will always be something that makes you hesitate, a responsibility, a relationship, a nameless fear. But there will also always be something whispering within you, asking, if not now, then when? Choosing yourself is not the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of a life no longer driven by external expectations, no longer dictated by fear. The beginning of an awakened journey, where you don't just live, you are present. You don't just exist, you show up for yourself. If these words have touched something within you, a memory, a longing, a quiet truth, maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe it's the first sign of synchronicity. And if you're standing at the edge of a decision, remember, you don't need to see the whole path. You just need enough courage to take the first step. What part of this message Have you ever dreamt of the silhouette of an ideal woman? Her face is unclear, her name unknown, yet she is you, and not entirely you. She walks between light and shadow, serene as deep water, her eyes holding a knowingness you haven't yet dared to recall. Her presence makes your heart contract, a mix of fear and longing. She is not a specific person, she is an energy, something you cannot wear, cannot learn from books, cannot copy from another, and deep within, you know, it lives inside you, smoldering, primal, waiting to be awakened. Carl Jung called this the feminine archetype, the part of the soul dimmed by society, the wildness stifled by discipline. Not femininity in the mold of softness, pleasantness, or compliance, but a living mystery, ancient as the earth, fierce as embers burning beneath the ground. In today's video, we won't talk about women as roles. We'll explore the feminine as a vibrant force, powerful, sometimes dangerous, always mysterious, existing in both men and women, in every dream, in every emotion we cannot fully grasp. And trust me, if you feel something stirring within you, not loudly, but with quiet certainty, stay until the end. For what you're radiating might just be the latent energy long hidden in your soul. Number 1. The feminine is not a gender, but an inner force. In a world where femininity is boxed into labels, cute, gentle, alluring, living true to the archetypal feminine feels almost like rebellion. Yet this is where Carl Jung offers a definition so profound and shattering that if you truly grasp it, you will never live the same way again. The feminine is not about gender. It is a life force, an ancient archetype. A spiritual dimension exists in every human, regardless of gender. It's not in the body, not in a soft voice or a graceful gesture. It lies deep within, where you are more intuitive than logical, more feeling than reasoning, more listening than controlling. It is a wisdom beyond explanation, yet always true. A current that knows when to let go, when to wait, when to forgive, and when to walk away without looking back. Jung called this the anima in men, but for women, the feminine energy is the very home of their soul. It is the foundation of emotions, the rhythm of the inner self, the cyclical nature, and the capacity to contain, all that cannot be measured by formulas, but makes you truly human. Recall those moments when others sought you out for comfort, to be heard, to unburden their hearts. Not because you were idle or gossipy, but because you carry an energy field that makes others feel safe, allowing them to touch their essence. That's not a skill. It's the archetypal feminine at work. In modern healing practices, this is called the power of presence, a deep state of consciousness where the other feels you are truly there, not rushing to fix, analyze, or advise. You are simply present, like a still lake, allowing others to see their reflection without judgment. This is not easy, for it requires you to have journeyed through your shadows and chosen to stay there without fleeing. This is why the archetypal feminine cannot be faked. It's not something you can perform. It is the result of an ego melting away, of a world desperately craves this energy, but the good news is it cannot be mass-produced. It cannot be mimicked on social media. It's not about a dress, a soft voice, or a few kind words that can turn an ordinary person into someone with high femininity. The archetypal feminine is a living flame smoldering in every cell of your being, waiting to be nurtured by authenticity, by daring to shed every mask to become vulnerable, wild, gentle, rough, exactly as you are. But the painful truth is that many women were never taught they have the right to connect with this, nor do they even realize there's something called feminine energy within them. This often stems from childhood circumstances. For example, a girl growing up in a financially struggling family with a mother who always bore the weight, always the pillar, making decisions because there was no other choice. That girl was taught by her mother to be strong, independent, and tough. As she grows, she becomes a capable, resourceful woman who can do anything. But deep inside, when she sees other women being protected, supported, or gentle, she feels a fierce longing for that and wishes she, too, could live that way. And so, the feminine within her is not allowed to live, smothered by a survival mechanism. Look at your own life. How many times have you forced yourself to be fine, to be strong, to not bother anyone, to be proper? How many times have you wanted to cry but smiled instead? How many times did you know your body needed rest, yet you kept pushing to match the world's pace? Share your feelings below. This is a chance to let your emotions live without suppressing them. In those moments, the feminine within you is starving. Not because you're not good enough, but because you've been trained to live against your nature for too long. But here's the good news. It has never died. It lives in every dream you don't understand. In the unease when everything is fine, yet you feel lost. In the urge to return to nature, to your body, to emotions you can't explain. You'll see that the feminine is not a vague state. It has form, symbols, and a language of its own. And to understand how the feminine truly lives within you, you must recognize who is operating in the deep temple of your soul, who is whispering that you haven't yet paused to hear. Number 2, the forms of the feminine. If feminine energy is a primal forest, then the archetypes are the spirits dwelling within it, each archetype an ancient symbol, a spiritual embodiment etched into the collective unconscious for thousands of years. Carl Jung not only uncovered the existence of these archetypes, but also revealed that every woman lives or is shaped by at least one form of the feminine archetype. No archetype is inherently good or bad. They become dangerous only when denied, blindly idealized, or mistaken for a fixed identity. They are not molds to fit yourself into, but mirrors to recognize the energy operating within you, sometimes hidden, sometimes distorted, and sometimes entirely forgotten. So which feminine form are you living in, and which part have you never dared to express? The first and one of the most powerful feminine archetypes is the mother. But Jung emphasized that the mother is not merely the one who gives birth, but a symbol of nurturing, containing, and protecting life. She is a woman who always listens, always cares for others, always ready to sacrifice. In this form, the feminine is like a warm embrace, a home with golden lamplight, a friend present when you fall. But when misaligned, the mother archetype can become the devouring mother, the woman who forgets herself to live for others, controls through care, and binds through love. A woman who constantly checks her partner's phone daily isn't acting out of domination, but because she was never taught to step away from the nurturer's role. She doesn't know that true love doesn't cling, but grants space to grow. When you're so accustomed to caring for others that you forget your own body, emotions, and desires, a vital part of you begins to wither. The part that knows passion, the part that knows too long, the part that lives for itself. This is where the lover emerges, like a blazing wind sweeping through rooms long filled only with the sound of duty. If the mother is earth, steady, receptive, then the lover is living fire, consuming, transformative, vibrant enough to remind you, you weren't born only to sacrifice, but to shine. Not every woman easily shifts from the mother to the lover. For many, this demand feels like selfishness, even wickedness. But in truth, the desire to feel beauty, to touch life with every sense, to be present for yourself, is not a sin but a sacred part stolen from you. According to Jung, the lover is the symbol of passion, creativity, beauty, and sensuality. But don't misunderstand. The lover is not merely about sexuality, but the ability to be fully present in every living moment. Picture a woman standing in the rain. She tilts her head to the sky, letting each drop touch her face, soak into her skin, and slide down her collar. Passers-by might see her as mad or foolish. But for her, it's the first time in years she feels truly alive. She has just the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. He understood. No one can truly be themselves without facing and reconciling with their inner darkness. The witch archetype is the one who guides you there. In life, this archetype appears as the woman with a piercing gaze, sometimes making others uncomfortable because she is too direct, too perceptive, and too real. She senses what others dare not say. She reads the hidden motives behind kind words. And she refuses to play society's games. Because of this, she is often called cold, overly serious, or unapproachable. Many women, as they grow, fold away their intuition, soften their intelligence, gentle their voice, bow their heads when they know they're right, just to be loved on others' terms. But deep inside, they feel they're living half a life, the other half locked in darkness. The witch is not mad. She is feared by society. She cannot be manipulated. She doesn't easily forgive deceit. And above all, she doesn't need others to define her worth. She is the woman who reads her dreams, who senses when something is wrong in a relationship before there's proof, who knows when to stay silent to observe and when to speak to unravel. She knows that light untested by darkness is a mere illusion, and intuition, unchecked by personal experience, is just a vague belief. When you connect with this archetype, you begin to trust the sensations in your body again. You don't need others to validate your instincts. You don't deny your inner doubts. And you dare to touch the parts of yourself you once called too strange or unfeminine. You may lose some friends, some relationships, some safe positions, but you will find yourself whole, instinctual, and wise, as Jung wrote. Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And when you dare to step into the witch's domain, something remarkable happens. You no longer see darkness as an enemy, but as a teacher. Pain is no longer a wound, but a door. This is when the goddess archetype awakens. The goddess, or Jung's Sophia archetype, is the final embodiment of the feminine when a woman has touched the unity of ego and self. Unlike the prior archetypes, this is not one you can imitate. It emerges when you've navigated spiritual trials, faced your shadow, reconciled with your wounded parts, and stopped seeking perfection outside yourself. Jung wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality." In a woman embodying the goddess, you sense this wholeness. A quiet, yet profound presence that invites others to return to their souls. But to reach this form, a woman must undergo a journey of death, birth, rebirth in consciousness. It's when you've lost yourself to please others, when you've wandered in darkness, full of doubt, pain, and emptiness, only to discover that the one you were truly seeking was yourself. Many women think they're strong when they achieve success, let go, or no longer need love. But that's merely escaping the prison. The goddess is not just the one who breaks free. She is the one who rebuilds the temple within, with bricks of truth, tears of acceptance, and light of awareness. In this state, she no longer needs roles. She doesn't worry about being a good mother, an ideal wife, a seductive woman, or a healer. She can be all of these or none, because labels no longer define her identity. She is not perfect. On the contrary, she has been shattered, made mistakes, and lost her way. But from those fragments, she has learned to piece her soul back together with trembling hands and deep faith in life. And when that happens, the goddess arises. Understanding the feminine archetypes isn't about labeling yourself or choosing a new role. It's about listening to which part is alive in you, which part you've neglected, which part you fear. Because sometimes, to know who you are, you must see yourself in the most ancient mirror, where the soul speaks in images, not words. When you truly realize you are not roles, you begin to crave something truer, wilder, more elusive, the primal, untamed feminine energy. But sadly, In a world that increasingly favors performance, this femininity is being turned into an image rather than an experience. Number 3. The feminine cannot be imitated. It must be awakened. Modern society lives amidst a forest of artificial light, dazzling, simulated, glittering, yet cold. The world doesn't lack images of femininity: silk dresses, smoky eyes, gentle words, soft expressions, handwritten letters with scented candles, herbal tea, and the word healing printed on everything from t-shirts to billboards. But true femininity isn't there. True femininity doesn't need to be displayed. It cannot be copied. It doesn't emanate from images. It doesn't arise from a formula for poise or a checklist of 30 ways to be more feminine. Because it doesn't come from the outside, from what others see, but from something belongs here. Not the place, but the person who was just elevated. She sits on the edge of the bed, removing each item from her body like shedding a second skin. She looks at the hands that signed countless contracts, shook countless partners' hands, and realizes that it's been so long since she cared for herself. And in that silence, something stirs. Not a thought, but a feeling, a bodily memory, something primal, soft, warm, smoldering like earth after rain. She begins to decline social engagements she once felt obligated to attend. She spends more time with her mother, with her family, simply to be present as two women, two generations breathing the same air, carrying the same inherited exhaustion that no one dared name before. No one sees this awakening from the outside. But she knows. She has touched her femininity again, not the gentle part, but the profound one. The part that knows how to let go. She knows she doesn't need to conquer anything to be worthy. At this point, if you recognize a similar moment in your life, quiet, profound, like a silent turning of the soul, share it with us in the comments below so you can reread it and know you're not alone. Jungian psychology suggests that the awakening of an archetype always comes with an identity crisis. because you cannot step into a deeper layer of yourself without letting the old layer collapse. The masks you've worn your whole life must fall away before you can become real. And in that moment, the feminine doesn't need to be performed. It emerges naturally through your breath, your gaze, the way you say no gently but uncompromisingly, the way you love someone without losing yourself, the way you touch the world with complete presence, whether cooking a meal or facing loss. This woman doesn't seek attention, but people seek her, because she embodies what the world craves: a heart that still feels, a body not locked away, a soul not trapped by expectations. Jung emphasized, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Only when you become aware of the feminine in your darkness, the suppressed, rejected part labeled irrational or overly emotional, do you begin to truly live with archetypal feminine energy. Otherwise, you'll keep wearing it like ill-fitting clothing, always feeling out of place. And perhaps you, the one reading these words, have felt this: a nameless longing, an emptiness amid abundance, a sense that you're doing everything right, but not living truly. That's the sign that the feminine within is calling, and it's the moment the anima steps out of the shadows. Number 4. The encounter with the anima. In Carl Jung's theory, if the archetypal feminine is an ocean within the soul, then the anima is the moon's reflection on its surface, both real and intangible, yet profoundly influencing every movement of spiritual life. The anima is the feminine archetype in the unconscious of a man, the bridge between the rational conscious world and the sacred emotional, intuitive unconscious. But what is both terrifying and wondrous is this: most of us don't realize we're living with the anima until a shock, often an emotional upheaval, a psychological crisis, or a haunting dream, forces us to face her. Jung once said, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. This image is fundamentally unconscious, a hereditary factor of primordial origin. The anima is not a real woman. She is a composite image, drawn from all the experiences a man has had with women in his life, especially his mother, his first love, the deep feminine symbols he has seen, desired, loved, or feared. But she is not merely a memory. She is a living, psychological entity in the unconscious that can either guide a man into emotional depth or drag him into illusion, chaos, and ruin. This explains why many men become obsessed with a woman they barely know, or why they might live with a loving wife yet feel something missing, dreaming of another woman who is more mysterious, wilder, or understands them better. They think they're seeking love, but in truth, they're chasing their own anima through the faces of others. Carl Jung called the anima the soul, not in a religious sense, but as the bridge between the ego and the self. In analytical psychology, the anima is the feminine archetype living in the unconscious of a man, but it is also a sacred part existing in everyone, especially women, as the depth of soul they often lose while chasing external images. If the ego is the captain of a ship, the anima is the inner compass, silent, yet always pointing true north toward home. Encountering the anima is a deep touch in the darkness. There's no radiant light, no applause, just you, in a room as still as earth, standing before the part of yourself you've rejected for years. It might be a strange, incomprehensible dream, a sadness with no reason, a sense of being lost in a life full of achievements. The journey to meet the anima often doesn't begin with a choice, but with a crisis. The anima knocks when you're at your weakest, not to make you fall, but to invite you to pause and turn inward. And if you're brave enough to listen, she doesn't appear as a radiant angel. Self-love as a slogan, but a vivid experience. Loving even when you're messy, uncertain, even in pain. Women are often seen as the keepers of the feminine. But the paradox is that the feminine in the form of the anima is what men must learn to approach. And when a man truly begins this journey, it transforms how he shows up in love, in the world, and in you. Jung wrote in Man and His Symbols, "Through the anima, a man finds his way to his own soul, and through her gains a new insight into life and a new set of values. When a man stops projecting his anima outward and begins integrating her into his inner life, a subtle and profound shift occurs. The world is no longer a place to seek love, but a space for the love within to be lived." Integrating the anima doesn't happen because he wants to be more feminine. It happens because he stops fearing the emotional, intuitive, vulnerable, sensitive, sacred parts of himself, parts he may have once mocked in women. When those parts are no longer denied, he doesn't react when you cry, doesn't retreat when you open up, doesn't stay silent when you need connection. And you will notice this not through words, but through the quality of his presence, gentle yet deep, still yet vibrant, not a searching light, but a warm space where you can be yourself. And you, the woman walking your journey, will recognize this difference immediately, because you no longer feel you must attract his love, but instead meet his soul, unfiltered by the ego's shell. Number 5. The process of individuation. Jung didn't view life as a series of tasks to conquer or a self-improvement project as we often see today. Individuation, in the deepest sense Jung described, is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It is the sacred moment when you begin to peel away the layers of masks built by society, family, and your inner fears, and dare to live with the original face of your soul. No one teaches women that they're allowed to stop playing roles. No one tells you that you can stop being gentle when you're angry, stop being composed when you're shattered, stop being strong when you're exhausted. And no one hands you a map to find yourself, because that path isn't in books, but in the darkness you've avoided your entire life. Individuation is when you stop performing. When you're so tired you can't keep forcing, you stop trying to fix it. It's the moment you place a hand on your heart and ask, what in me has been neglected the longest? That's when the feminine within you, the primal pulse of life, begins to seep through the cracks. When you dare to do this, the feminine energy in you shifts. It's no longer something you used to like. It becomes something you live because it is you. You don't need to be gentle because you're truly gentle with yourself. You don't need to act feminine because your presence alone softens the room. You no longer strain to control because you trust the natural rhythm guiding you like a silent but powerful stream. Jung once said, "The self is a living system of opposites." And so it is. Individuation is the art of living with a paradox, both strong and soft, light and dark, nurturing and destructive, sacred and instinctual. A woman who steps into this journey no longer needs to be reasonable. She needs to be real. Imagine a wild forest, no pre-carved paths, only thorns, roots, shadows and sounds you've never named. That's the unconscious. And you, the woman, are the one who dares to enter without a map, not to conquer, but to touch the parts of yourself you've disowned. Individuation doesn't demand you love yourself. It only asks you to stop running. And then, when you're brave enough to sit among the ashes, without seeking solutions, you'll start to hear your breath, for the first time, not through anyone else's echo. In that moment, you don't need anyone to affirm you're feminine. You don't need men's longing gazes. You don't need a group of women cheering you on. You don't need a certificate of healed. You become inimitable, not because you're special, but because you've dug deep into a place few dare to go. From that place, you don't need to be attractive. You attract with a magnetism that defies naming. Not because you know how to attract, but because you embody something ancient, wild and sacred. An energy that makes anyone who enters slow down. That's the energy of a woman who has integrated her darkness without losing her light, who has embraced her pain without becoming its victim, who has died as an ego and been reborn as a soul. And you know what? When you live this way, you don't just heal yourself. You open a path for other women to awaken and step toward themselves. Ultimately, the journey back to the archetypal feminine isn't about becoming someone else. It's about shedding the layers of disguise that have covered your true self for years. And feminine energy, in its deepest sense, is the life that listens to that rhythm, unhurried, unbound, not to become divine, but to live truly, sometimes messy, sometimes contradictory, but always honest. A woman connected to the archetypal feminine